as a working mom, I try to spend every spare moment with my kids, partly because I want to spend every spare moment with my kids, and partly because I want them to know that I want to spend every spare moment with them. Because if I'm being honest here, I didn't always feel that way about my own mom. I want to just do a little better, I guess, than my own mom did. Now, in her defense, it was a different time. I grew up in the 80s, and we didn't have helicopter parenting so much as rocket launcher parenting. From my understanding, at least, it seemed like parents would raise their kids until they were able to feed themselves, go potty by themselves, and most importantly, turn the TV on by themselves, and then they were done. As my mom would put it, don't bother me unless you are bleeding to death. Now, my mom was a single mom, and she didn't work, so she had more than her fair share of kid time, right? And this got especially bad in the summer because, summer camp hadn't been invented yet, so the kids were around all the time. So my mom's rule in the summer was she'd kick us out in the morning and tell us not to come back until the streetlights came on, right? She did not want us to bother her unless we were bleeding to death. Now, I was the baby, and so sometimes it took me a little bit longer to get out the door. So my mom would start just sort of yelling, "Go, get out there." And I'd say, "What do you want me to do?" And she'd say, "Go play in the street." Which I think she was kidding about. I'd like to imagine that she was kidding about that. The summer I was 8 years old, my parents were divorced, my dad brought us a puppy, a little mutt, a little yellow mutt that grew up to look exactly like a dingo. And I wanted to name the dog Scooter, because that seemed like a good name for a dog, but my brother, he was older, and he won the argument. He named the dog after his favorite character on his favorite TV show, the very classic Dukes of Hazzard. So my Scooter became my Cooter. Yes, we named the dog Cooter. And Cooter became my best friend. I started taking Cooter with me everywhere I went. And Cooter was too small to fight me, so it was me and my Cooter, whether or not she liked it. And this one summer day, I took Cooter to my favorite place, Indian Hill, the nearby park named after the Indian corn that grew on the hill. See, I bet you guys didn't know this is a Thanksgiving story after all. And Cooter and I headed to my favorite part of Indian Hill, which was, of course, the tire park. If you have not experienced a tire park, let me tell you, it is a playground made out of tractor tires bolted together in interesting and I'm sure very safe ways. So I took Cooter with me on the tire swing, which was just a giant rubber tire with these big metal bolts sticking out at weird angles and a big unwrapped chain, and that was fine, that was pleasant. Tire swings don't move very fast. And then we went on another staple of any good 80s playground, which was the metal slide. The solid 250 degrees in the sun, never gets taken away until it rusts to death slide. I went down a few times because I love going down, and then I thought, well, let me put the dog on it because, of course she's going to love it. Now, Cooter had little sharp puppy dog nails, but even so, those nails could not find purchase on that metal slide, so she just whoosh, right off the end, which she didn't like. And I was not a terrible person, so I only made her go down 40 or 50 more times. And then I took Cooter on my favorite part of the tire park, which was the jungle gym. A jungle gym consisting entirely of these big tractor tires bolted together, kind of in cube structures. So you had like the four with the one on top and then the four with the one on top, kind of, stapled together. And I climbed all the way to the top of one of the tire towers. And of course I brought Cooter with me because I couldn't leave her down there in the lava. But Cooter didn't seem to like the view from up top that much. Cooter was shaking and nervous, so I put her on my lap and I just started stroking my Cooter, trying to calm her down. And she didn't like it. She was squirming around and she wouldn't sit still, and she started to slide. The good news is This time, her nails found purchase. The bad news is it was in my leg. But my skin stopped her from falling for a second before my skin just gave way. And as she slid off, so did the skin on my leg. Now, she landed in the nice, soft concrete ground, but she was fine. She just stood there staring up at me like, I hate you. And I was like, I love you too. And I wasn't sure how it was. I was 8 years old, and I looked at my leg, and nothing was happening. It was great. It seemed like I was fine, but I guess I didn't realize at the time that when you get scratches with a razor blade, essentially, nothing does happen right away. And then the blood, kind of like the lava on the ground below, just started to bubble up underneath my skin, and then it started to just pour out of these various wounds. And I gotta say, I was a big baby, but for some reason, I did not start crying. So I now, in my grown-up phase, I think maybe I was in shock. I was very practical. I climbed down, I got Cooter, and we headed home because I knew I was gonna need medical attention. So we walked through the Indian cornfield and down the dusty hill and through the branches and the block or so to my house. And when I got there, I let Cooter off the leash, and she ran and hid, never to be seen again. And then I called out, but my mom wasn't there because it was the middle of the day in the summer, and Mom was where she always was. She was at her best friend Bonnie's house. And I knew this. So I, this was before cell phones, so I knew Bonnie's phone number. We had memories back then. Yeah. And I walked over to the phone, the beautiful yellow-colored phone that was hanging on the kitchen wall, and I picked it up and I dialed. And 45 minutes later, Bonnie's phone rang and she picked it up, and I said, "Hey, Bon, is my mom there?" And Bonnie was a mother herself. She was a good mom of the 80s. She knew her duty towards my mom. She lied. She said, "Nope, Annie's not here," and she hung up the phone. And I knew Bonnie well enough to know that if I called her back, she would not pick up. So the only thing I could do was to go to Bonnie's house, which fortunately was only another block and a half away. So I limped over there. I don't remember crying, but by now I was definitely feeling the pain. So I kind of limped across the street and up the block, and I knocked on Bonnie's screen door, and I could see her sitting at her kitchen table, and she very slowly got up like she was really annoyed, and she walked slowly over. And when she opened the screen door, I'd like to say she had a reaction to the sight, but it was really pretty casual. My Daisy Dukes were drenched. They were maroon at this point. My leg was covered in blood. My knee-high tennis socks were covered in blood, and my tennis shoes were pooling with blood. And I was just kind of standing there all lopsided. And Bonnie saw me, and she just called over her shoulder, "Annie, your kid's bleeding." So my mom came, and she saw me too, and she didn't get mad at me, apparently. I was justified in bothering her. I looked like I was indeed going to bleed to death. And I figured, great, here's Mom. We're going to go to the hospital. We're going to get this taken care of. And Mom walked me home. And she didn't take me right to the car. She took me to the kitchen, and she had me climb up on the counter, and she took my socks and my shoes off, and then she had me put my leg over the kitchen sink. And then she did what any good mom of the 80s or today would do. She took out that giant, ugly, brown 40-gallon bottle of peroxide and just glug, 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 glug. And as I watched the pieces of tire and Indian corn and puppy dog nails bubble out of me, the scratches up here, they looked red and swollen. But the one down here, it was clean as bone. I mean, it was clean down to the bone. And that is when I started freaking out, and finally the shock wore off, and I found myself hyperventilating and crying and screaming, and my mom, she did what a good 80s mom would do. She sort of took the skin that was flapped over, and she pushed it back into place, an approximation of where it was before, and then she wrapped some bandages around it, and then she scooped me up in her arm, and I thought, now we're going to go to the doctor. But she didn't carry me to the car. She carried me to the couch, where she left me for the next several days. She wasn't a complete monster. She did turn the TV on. And I will say she did not leave me alone for the next few days. She stayed with me in that house. A huge sacrifice on her part, I'm sure. And over the next few days, every time I had to move to get up to go to the bathroom or anything else, any part of the healing that had begun on my knee was undone. So it was on the 4th or 5th day when I got up to go to the bathroom and I started limping past my mom, who was sitting at the dining room table smoking a cigarette. And she sort of stopped when she saw me with the blood newly dripping down my leg, and she went, "Probably should have taken you to the doctor for stitches. Too late now." And as an 8-year-old, I was like, yeah, I guess so. But as a grown-up, as a parent of some kids myself, I'm thinking no. If your leg is bleeding after several days, probably it is not too late to go to the doctor. The good news is, though, if I want to do better than my own mom, I think the bar is set kind of low. All I really have to do to improve on that situation is not scar my kids for life. Thank you.